The fall of Nicolás Maduro was supposed to end the story. Instead, it exposed a far more dangerous question. Who gets to define legitimacy after power changes hands? Donald Trump celebrates an operation, a removal, a moment of strength. But strength without clarity creates vacuum. Inside Washington, the message fractures. The White House hesitates. Florida Republicans do not. They speak with one voice. They say the transition has a face. They say that face is María Corina Machado. Trump publicly is unsure. He questions her support. He questions her standing. That single doubt matters more than missiles or meetings, because revolutions don't collapse when dictators fall. They collapse when allies disagree on what comes next. If you want to understand how democracy quietly fails after victory, stay with me. This is not a story about Venezuela alone. It's about power, timing, and the cost of hesitation. And before we go further, ask yourself one thing. Who decides the future when the present is unstable? Because that question leads us to the real problem beneath the headlines. The argument unfolding around Venezuela is not about personalities. It is about sequencing. What comes first after force succeeds, stability or legitimacy? The Trump administration is signaling caution. Move slowly, manage the immediate reality, avoid bloodshed. That sounds responsible, but it avoids the harder truth, because transitions are not neutral spaces. They are battles over narrative. Florida Republicans understand this instinctively. They represent the largest Venezuelan diaspora in the United States. They have lived with the consequences of failed transitions before. To them, removing Maduro was only step one. Step two is naming the democratic successor. Clearly, publicly, without ambiguity. That is why they are unified around María Corina Machado. Not because she is convenient, but because legitimacy decays when it is delayed. Trump's hesitation creates a gap, and gaps are where chaos enters. This is the central tension, not whether Maduro fell, but whether democracy is allowed to rise immediately afterward. To see why this moment is so fragile, we have to step back and understand how Venezuela arrived here in the first place. Venezuela did not collapse overnight. It eroded slowly, predictably, power concentrated, institutions hollowed out, elections transformed into rituals without choice. For years, Nicolás Maduro ruled through endurance, not legitimacy, survival, not consent. The opposition fractured, leaders were exiled, others were silenced. That history matters now, because transitions inherit the scars of the system they replace. When the United States backed the operation that removed Maduro, it intervened at the end of a long decay cycle, not the beginning. And in those moments, the past shapes the future more than slogans. Florida Republicans remember this arc clearly. They watched prior half-transitions fail, caretaker governments stall, temporary leaders become permanent obstacles. That is why names matter, why timing matters. A vacuum invites substitutes, and substitutes rarely surrender power voluntarily. This is the lesson the administration knows, but also fears, because Venezuela's opposition, as Marco Rubio admitted, is largely outside the country. And yet, history tells us something uncomfortable. Democracy delayed is democracy denied, which brings us to the first real rupture in this process. The moment optimism collided with reality. The crisis did not arrive with tanks, it arrived with words. In the hours after Maduro was removed, Donald Trump spoke plainly. He questioned whether María Corina Machado had real support inside Venezuela. One sentence, one hesitation. But in transitional politics, language is leverage. Florida Republicans reacted instantly, not with rebellion, but with correction. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That interruption from Mario Diaz-Balart was not spontaneous. It was strategic, because silence would have signaled doubt, and doubt spreads faster than certainty. Behind closed doors, the meaning was clear. If Washington does not name the future, someone else will. Public praise for the administration continued. Private concern intensified. This was not about defying Trump. It was about preventing drift. History is unforgiving to moments like this. The first narrative to harden becomes reality. And as Trump prepared to meet Machado, the question shifted. Was this meeting symbolic reassurance or a test of political retreat? Because the answer would reveal whether the transition was real or merely procedural. And that leads us to the deeper system beneath the headlines. Every transition hides a mechanism, unspoken, powerful. It is not written in constitutions. It operates through recognition. Who is treated as real? Who is treated as temporary? The Trump administration is managing risk, prevent violence, avoid fragmentation, stabilize first. On paper, this is rational. But Florida Republicans are operating on a different logic. They understand exile politics. They understand symbolic authority. In fractured states, legitimacy is not organic. It is conferred by allies, by recognition, by naming. That is why María Corina Machado matters now, not later. Delay creates alternatives, caretakers, committees, interim figures without mandates, and history shows what happens next. Temporary power calcifies. Even Marco Rubio's language reveals the tension. She's fantastic, but we are dealing with the immediate reality. That but is everything, because reality is shaped by choices, not managed passively. The hidden mechanism here is simple. Transitions succeed when legitimacy is front-loaded and fail when it is postponed, which brings us to the second rupture, more dangerous than the first. The second crisis was quieter but more destabilizing. It emerged not from Caracas, but from Washington's language of contingency. We are dealing with the immediate reality. That phrase signals postponement, and postponement creates actors. Into the gap stepped the interim logic. Caretakers, cooperation demands, threats of compliance or punishment. Delcy Rodriguez became the symbol of that moment, not as a solution, but as a test. Cooperate, or face prison, or worse. This is where transitions harden or fracture. Florida Republicans saw the danger instantly, because coercion without clarity is unstable. You cannot threaten your way into legitimacy. You cannot intimidate democracy into existence. The risk was no longer bloodshed. It was drift, a prolonged in-between state where no one governs fully and no one leaves willingly. This was the second peak, less dramatic than regime removal, more consequential for democracy. Because power that lingers without mandate does not dissolve, it entrenches, and that is when ordinary people pay the price, which brings us to the most human part of this story. Now shift your perspective, away from Washington, away from press conferences. Think about you. If you are Venezuelan, or if you have watched your country unravel from afar, transitions are not abstractions. They determine whether your life restarts or stays on pause. Every day without clarity means uncertainty. Jobs not returning, savings not trusted, families still divided. This is why Florida Republicans speak so forcefully. They hear these stories daily. They represent people who lived through temporary solutions that became permanent suffering. For ordinary Venezuelans, a name matters, a signal matters. When the world says, this is the legitimate leader, hope becomes actionable. When the world hesitates, people hedge, they wait, they leave. If this story resonates with you, pause for a moment, share it, because transitions fail quietly when no one is watching, and as personal lives hang in the balance, the consequences do not stop at Venezuela's borders, they spread outward. Venezuela does not exist in isolation. Its transition sends signals far beyond Caracas. Every unresolved handover becomes a lesson for allies, for adversaries. When Washington hesitates, others observe. They see uncertainty as opportunity. They see ambiguity as leverage. Florida Republicans understand this geopolitical echo. That is why they push for clarity. A delayed transition invites external influence, back-channel deals, regional instability. Democracy does not fail loudly on the world stage. It erodes through unmanaged transitions. The message to authoritarian regimes is subtle but dangerous. Remove the leader, but leave the system undefined. That precedent matters, because the question is no longer about Venezuela. It becomes about credibility. Can democratic powers follow through, or do they stop at force and abandon governance? This is why this moment is being watched, not just in Latin America, but globally. And that brings us to the hardest question of all. What happens next? There are only three futures from here. No more, no less. First, the best case scenario. Clarity arrives quickly. The United States aligns its language with its actions. María Corina Machado is explicitly recognized as the legitimate democratic leader of the transition. That recognition compresses uncertainty. Institutions recalibrate, the opposition consolidates, elections become inevitable. Second, the middle path. Ambiguity persists. Caretakers govern longer than promised. Negotiations replace momentum. This is the most tempting option and the most corrosive, because hope decays slowly. People disengage quietly. Then there is the worst case scenario. The transition stalls. Power fragments. Temporary authorities entrench themselves. Democracy becomes procedural theater. This is not speculation. It is historical pattern. The system does not choose the future. Leaders do. And the difference between success and failure is not force. It is decisiveness. Which brings us to the final question. Not what Venezuela will become, but whether its allies are willing to finish what they started. I want to end where this story truly begins, with responsibility. Removing Nicolás Maduro was an act of power. Completing the transition is an act of judgment. History does not reward hesitation. It records it. The divide we are watching is not partisan. It is philosophical. Do you treat democracy as an outcome or as a process that must be protected at its most fragile moment? Florida Republicans have chosen their answer. They believe legitimacy must be named early, clearly. The White House is still deciding, and that decision will echo longer than any operation, because unfinished transitions do not pause history. They distort it. If this analysis sharpened how you see power, share it. If you want the next chapter, follow this conversation. Because Venezuela's future is a warning, and the world is entering an era where removing leaders is easy, but building democracy afterward is the real test. That test has already begun.